Welcome to Cafe 229. Today, we're very happy and honored to have Dr. Zindel Segal. Dr. Zindel Segal is a distinguished professor of psychology in mood disorders at University of Toronto Scarborough. More importantly, Dr. Segal is the co-founder of MBCT, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy. Hi, Dr. Segal. Thank you so much for coming to Cafe 229. We're really happy to have you.
It's my pleasure.
So, as an expert in mindfulness and psychotherapy, can you tell us a little bit about what you think mindfulness is?
Yeah, it's a very important question because I think mindfulness is a big term, gets used a lot these days.
Yeah.
I'm not always certain that it's fully understood. When I talk to people about mindfulness, I like to use an understanding that's very basic and that actually refers to capacities that people already have within them.
Uh-huh.
And so I start with attention.
Okay.
For me, the starting point of mindfulness is the ability to pay attention, but to pay attention in a particular way. So when we practice mindfulness, we pay attention on purpose. In other words, we are the ones who are controlling our attention. We bring it to a particular place, which is the present moment. And what we do when we arrive at that place is that we don't judge what we notice.
Uh-huh.
And mindfulness is the awareness of all of that coming together.
Okay.
Intentional application of attention to the present moment without judging.
Uh-huh.
And that awareness gives us an experience of something that is quite unusual than the ways in which our attention is often pulled away or distracted or owned by different stimuli in our environment that we may not even be aware of.
So mindfulness is a way to train our attention to bring it to the present moment with this non-judgmental attitude. Now, one thing I often encounter when I talk to my students, one thing they think about non-judgmentalness, often people mistaken what non-judgmental attitude is. Can you elaborate a little bit on what non-judgmental attitude is?
Yeah, another big term that really can benefit from some explanation. You know, non-judgmental can seem like it's asking people to do something that they don't want to do. Sometimes judging can seem important. You know, is this good for me? Is this bad for me?
Right.
Is this right? Is this wrong? So sometimes you might want to consider non-judgmental as a term that can be replaced by the word curious.
Yeah. Okay.
So we become curious about what we find when we pay attention in this particular way, without needing to evaluate it. And that's a starting point.
I think that's a very good way to introduce mindfulness to someone, which is really bring our mind to the present with this open, curious attitude. This remind me of the traditional Zen training, where the Kong-an training is the whole idea that life is a Kong-an and we should treat it with this open curiosity. So that's what mindfulness is about. How do you come up the idea of combining mindfulness with cognitive therapy? Because I mean, some of our audience may not know, but you're one of the founders of MBCT, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy. And I just wonder, what was the story? How did you put those two together, mindfulness and cognitive therapy?
Yeah, I think there is a story.
Okay.
Because initially, you wouldn't think that the two of them would go together. You know, mindfulness is about watching and observing thinking, watching thoughts enter your mind, not getting too attached to them, watching them sort of move through the mind. And cognitive therapy is about working with thoughts, but at the same time, it's about trying to change thoughts, change the degree of belief in thought. Evaluate evidence that supports or doesn't support a thought. So it seems like they're working in different directions. Mindfulness is saying, you know, here's a thought, just watch it, don't engage with it. Cognitive therapy is saying, here's a thought, engage with it, see if it's true.
Right.
And so for me, the story started with jumping back into psychotherapy. And psychotherapy for specific mental health condition, which was people who had had depression, who had been well treated and who had recovered, but continued to face high risk of relapse. So for these people, and they may have been recovered because they had cognitive therapy, or they may have recovered because they had antidepressant medication. But for these people, they needed to learn skills to help them stay well. And what we found was that my colleagues Mark Williams and John Teasdale, when people responded to cognitive therapy, yes, they learned how to fill out thought records and track their thinking and become aware of thoughts that might be negative or extreme. And they learned how to do this for themselves when their emotions were negative, or they were feeling distressed. So they learned these skills at treating their thoughts as ideas or hypotheses. And in mindfulness, we are training the same capacity to see our thoughts as events occurring in our mind that can arise, that can rest in the mind, and that can pass through the mind. In both of these approaches, we are giving people the message, or people are discovering the message in these practices. Thoughts are not facts.
Excellent.
And so to get to a place where you can decenter, have some psychological distance from your thoughts, is very, very helpful in preventing relapse. And there's a good deal of research that has shown that. But you can get there either through the practices of cognitive therapy that get you to say, well, here's a thought, I'm feeling distressed, but it doesn't mean it's a fact, because I can look at it through these different angles. Or in mindfulness practice, you can see a thought coming into the mind and you can say to yourself, well, here's a thought. It's not a fact or something I have to engage with. I can, welcome it, watch it stay, watch it move. So both of these approaches have this common landing place. And that's why we felt that mindfulness training in particular could be very helpful to build these skills in decentering that could really help protect patients.
Oh, great. So it seems like the key thing that our audience should remember is the concept of decentering. The idea of creating a creative space between our thoughts and reality.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, a place where you can stand to observe your experience of thinking, at the same time being able to see yourself as not fully engaged or identified with the thinking that's going on in the mind.
You are not the thought.
So, yeah, exactly. So, we say to people, you have a thought like, I'm a loser, or I'm no good, or other people are better than me. It's one thing to say, I'm a loser, I'm no good. It's another thing to say, I'm having a thought that says I'm a loser. Or the thought I'm no good has just come into my mind. These are two separate standpoints. My mind versus I am.
That is sort of something crucial there. When we take the thought as the self, when we become too serious with our thoughts, that is where the problem starts. So I know you focus on, I know you're an expert in people who relapse in terms of depression. And what makes some people more likely to relapse than others?
Well, there are a lot of different reasons why people relapse in depression. There are just a kind of statistical reason which has to do with how many episodes people have had in the past of depression. So if they've had depression, it's been treated, but they keep relapsing, they're more likely to relapse in the future. If they have family histories of depression, in other words, a lot of people in their family have had depression, or if they've had trauma, then those are also contributing factors. And I think what we've shown is that once people recover, if they don't engage in some type of wellness practice or activity to help them maintain their mood levels, then they're also at high risk for relapse. And that can be, regular exercise, that can be mindfulness practice, that can be, doing yoga. There can be some way in which they become an agent of looking after themselves, rather than saying, okay, I got through this episode of depression, I don't need to worry about it, I think I'm going to be okay.
Right. So it's important for people who suffer from depression really pick up a mentality that they need to be responsible or train their mind and body in some way so they can sort of maintain their health.
Yeah, so they can participate in looking after themselves.
Right. So I would assume people who participate in MBCT, one of the recommendations you have is probably mindfulness training, mindfulness meditation.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, MBCT is an 8-week program, but it's over pretty quickly. So one of the messages inside MBCT is you have these 8 weeks to learn practices that you can embed in your life and take them with you once the program is over. And we're going to provide you with a place where you can learn about these practices, hear how they impact with other people, hear how an expert teacher can help you understand how to use these practices. But once the course is over, you're kind of on your own. Now, I have to say that these days, compared to 20 or 25 years ago when we first started this, there are a lot of resources out there that people can use and make very accessible to themselves. When we started MBCT, we would say to people, if you want to find a place where you can practice mindfulness with other people, we used to say the only place in Toronto used to be like a Zen temple or a Buddhist temple. And we would say to them, you don't have to become a Buddhist and you don't have to join a Zen order, but this is a place where, like on Sunday mornings, you can come and sit with other people.
Right.
But that was tough because it was off-putting. A lot of people wouldn't do that.
Right.
Now, these days, you can download apps, or you could even download our practices from the program, put them on your phone, and have them as close to you as pressing a button.
Yeah.
Or other apps like Insight Timer will tell you if you're practicing at 8:30 on a Sunday morning, how many other people around the world are practicing with you. So there are far more supports available, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. So when you started, there's not as many mindfulness center around, I assume. But now, now mindfulness is such a sort of buzzword. Everyone you have mindfulness everything now. How do you feel about that? True. There's like mindfulness everything, like mindful burger.
I'm really honestly, I'm honestly very mixed about it. Because I'm mixed because on the one hand, 25 years ago, I would never have expected that so many resources would be available to people in such an accessible way. And that it's no longer seen as a kind of, sort of new age, weird thing to be doing, to be meditating.
Yeah.
That's good. Business leaders, athletes, celebrities, everyday people, to meditate. It's great. I heard an interview with Big Sean, one of the biggest rappers, the last 5 years. And he said he had a very difficult period of depression. And one of the things that helped him get through it was getting some help therapeutically and starting to meditate. So those kinds of endorsements are really helpful.
Yeah.
But I feel like the dark side is that the idea of what gets communicated is sometimes really confused. Because in mindfulness, there are, if we just want to talk about it simplistically, there are phases of practice. Even inside a 20 or 30 minute practice, there are phases of experience that you can touch. Initially, there's a phase of hypoarousal, relaxation. Closing your eyes and doing nothing.
Right.
It lowers the parasympathetic nervous system and arousal, and you can relax and you can feel really chill. But the point in mindfulness is that then sets you up, quieting your mind. It sets you up to investigate experiences that are often unpleasant or pleasant. But it sets you up to move into this investigation mode. My worry about contemporary presentations of mindfulness is that they focus on the first and they just leave out the second.
That make a very important point, because people enjoy the first aspect. So mindfulness does have two aspects of it, right? One aspect is to calm your mind down, to still the mind. I guess in the Zen lingo is to still the mind. But it's really the second aspect that's even more important, is to really investigate the construction of reality, which takes probably a lot more work, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So to know that thought is not fact is an important idea. But often what we do with people is we see other people's thought as not fact, but our thought is a real fact. Right?
That's right.
Right? And the training of mindfulness is actually kind of see the opposite, right? Our thought is not fact, that's where the wisdom generated. But to recognize other people do suffer because they do sort of, I guess, cognitive fused, right? With their ideas, right?
Yeah.
So it is, it's interesting that you talk about how people, when we sort of popularize mindfulness, people may focus a bit more on sort of the relaxing aspect of it. I mean, sometimes I tell my students, if you just want to relax, you could just go to massage, I mean, it's more, it's more than just relaxing. So I know right now the pandemic time is really tough for many people. And people do feel, and we do see the mental health issue rise from the pandemic. How do you think MBCT can contribute to the pandemic?
I think that what I've heard is that the ability to provide groups online has become more acceptable. And so if you are receiving MBCT online, you have the potential to reach people who are living anywhere. It used to be the case if you're in New York City that you go to an MBCT group here or there. But now if you're an MBCT therapist providing MBCT, you can have people join you from all parts of the country. And the idea of receiving care online is no longer seen as problematic or as a kind of consolation prize. It's seen as very legitimate. And I think MBCT, in terms of the accessibility, can be very helpful. Now, MBCT wouldn't be for everybody because there is a focus on having recovered from depression or dealing with anxiety. But there are practices inside MBCT that allow people to work with the more common consequences of the pandemic related to constant worry or catastrophization or being sort of addicted to news and constant updates of negative numbers and things like that. But I think a mindfulness practice can also be very helpful with that without having to go through the entire MBCT program.
So one good thing about pandemic is actually like what we're doing right now. We're doing a Zoom interview, and now people can do that with their therapist.
Yeah, and Zoom lets you, or digital platforms let you conduct a group in a way that can still have many, many valuable elements in it, including the capacity to guide practice and the capacity to hear from people in inquiry how those practices are going. And then, of course, because so much of the work at MBCT takes place between classes, because we ask people to practice mindfulness on their own at home in different ways, casually and formally, all of this rich material can be brought back into the class when it meets again online.
How do you monitor your clients who practice mindfulness through Zoom? That is something, a new challenge, right? Like traditionally, we see people sitting in the mindfulness center. People practice mindfulness. You can, you can see what they're doing. You can adjust them. Nowadays, how do you do that through Zoom? What do you think?
You don't really have the capacity to put a camera in people's houses and film them while they're practicing.
Right. We don't want to stop them.
That's exactly right. We don't want to send a drone to their house and record them practicing mindfulness.
Right.
But I think what you can do online is what you would do in a class where, as the teacher, you can be more deliberate about describing posture, describing attitude, describing intention, even showing people different ways of sitting. You're sitting in a chair, sitting on a cushion. But also emphasizing the intentions behind finding a way of sitting that's comfortable and supported. There are a lot of people that have assumptions or stereotypes about if you're practicing mindfulness in a chair, it's not as good as sitting with your legs crossed on a cushion,
right?
Or that you need to have complete silence around you and your kids can't say anything and there can't be anyone in the other room.
Right.
All of these things are actually barriers to practice. And the one thing that we do actually encourage are people to practice in ways that incorporate mindfulness into their everyday lives. So if you're waking up and you're having breakfast in the morning, maybe if you're putting butter on toast, can you feel the knife spreading the butter slowly on the toast? And can you feel the butter melting into the toast, or can you feel the knife scraping the surface of the toast? Things like that are moments of mindfulness that people can connect with that are very, very legitimate. And sometimes people can elevate, a 40-minute sitting practice into the only way to practice mindfulness. But my experience with what people do after MBCT is over is that many, many more people practice this informal way of connecting mindfully to their moments in their day. Much fewer people practice, sitting for 30 or 40 minutes.
Right. Well, when I started my Zen training, my teacher said, the formal Zen training means that you have to meditate 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour at night, and then he lost 30 people right there. So,
well, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
So no, so that does not
work. Good thing you hung in though.
But I hear what you're saying is very important. The importance of being mindful is not just to be on the cushion, but to really be mindful in daily life. Mindfulness in action. That is sort of the key thing. So I'm very glad to hear that your clients who went through MBCT all can sort of learn to apply this mindfulness in daily life. Now, back to what we were talking about earlier. I assume some of your clients may want to, some of them may just want to practice simple mindfulness. But did any of your clients become more interested in the theoretical or philosophical background of mindfulness from your experience?
It's interesting, Peter, because when you ask the question, what brings people into MBCT, for them, the primary motivation to come in through the door is to learn to work with afflictive emotions. They're looking for relief from their suffering of having problems with emotional dysregulation.
Right.
Mindfulness offers them a chance to enhance emotional regulation. That's why they're coming to a hospital. That's why they're coming to a therapist. That's why they're coming to a counselor. That's why they're reaching out to people who offer this.
Right.
Through the lens of depression or mood disorders. And yet, inside these mindfulness-based cognitive therapy groups, there are people who really connect with the practices, and as they do a bit of a deeper dive into where the practices come from, or how the practices can inform different aspects of their lives, not just depression and mood. Some people do begin to identify a little bit more with the larger frame of practice, the worldview of things changing, a sense of a smaller ego, a smaller sense of self, and increased generosity towards other people. I've seen those things happen.
Oh, nice. So that is sort of a pleasant surprise. People who came in with an idea of just solving their own sort of personal suffering, personal depression, yet by dealing with their own personal stress, somehow they are able to expand, I guess, or dissolve their ego a little bit, and are able to connect with others more.
I think that happens. I don't think it happens to everybody, but they start to understand interconnection. They start to understand that if they can become less judgmental about themselves, their own experience, they can let go of the lens of judgment, then sometimes it becomes harder to start judging other people. Because you see how judgment is a quality that arises that you don't have to continue to support in your own mind. And so then when it starts to arise for yourself vis-a-vis other people, sometimes you can recognize that, oh, there's judgment again. And sometimes have a place of standing and saying, maybe I don't want to continue to view things in this way.
Yeah, it's when our judgment of self lessens, we judge others less, and our mind open up more for other people. But I guess it's important to start with oneself, right? If you, after all, you're where the issue is. So, would you say that to be kind, you have to start with yourself?
I think that in MBCT and in the practice of mindfulness, we start with kindness from the beginning, from the beginning. I talked to you about attention,
right?
As an important definition of mindfulness, but inside the way we pay attention is also a kindness to ourselves, because what we find is not something that has to be good or bad. It's just sort of honoring what's there. And in the instructions where we guide mindfulness practices, we use a lot of language that is invitational, that is asking people when they feel ready to shift their attention, if they're willing to do this, to do that, and to substitute curiosity for judgment, and to substitute kindness for evaluation. And so if you're practicing in a 40-minute sitting, 30-minute sitting, or if you're doing it throughout the day, if you notice that you're rushing to get to work, you have 3 things you have to do before you get to work, and your lunch isn't ready, and you know that you're going to be facing traffic, there's a way in which you can judge yourself and say, oh, I didn't wake up early enough. What's wrong with me? Why did I binge watch my favorite program? I should have gotten more sleep. The mind can very easily go there. But another option is to say, I notice that I'm rushing. This is what rushing feels like right now. And, what's the next thing that I need to do? Or just acknowledge rushing. If you could even laugh at yourself a little bit, that's even better. It's not an easy thing to do. But these are ways in which kindness and a kind intention, a kind curiosity gets sprinkled in from the beginning throughout the whole program. And I think if it connects with people, that's an important factor.
Oh, I think that's a That's a very well put. This kind curiosity, this kind attention is really important for someone who want to be free from their suffering and depression. It seems like people who depress has this tendency to judge more than others. Would you say?
Well, I think depression has certain ways of impacting the mind. And so there is a way in which, in terms of thinking, we see people who feel hopeless, they feel helpless,
Right.
they feel worthless, and they start to see the world through that lens. So if they believe that about themselves, once again, they become very much identified with their thinking, then it's very congruent for them to judge themselves. What they do isn't good enough because they feel worthless. What they do won't change anything because they feel helpless. What they do isn't going to be worth the effort because they feel hopeless. But these are things that come up. And so what we're doing in MBCT is suggesting a radically different stance. If you're having hopeless thoughts, just recognize the hopelessness. If you're having worthless thoughts or judgmental thoughts, recognize that judgment is here. But here in the mind still means that there may be room for you to stand and watch all of that rather than be fully fused with it.
Right. So it's important to be able to see our depressive thoughts, but not to fuse with it. Right. To have the space with your thoughts, but to have this curiosity and kindness, this kind of attitude watching it, this kind and curious attention towards our mental object.
That's right. That's right. You know, I was reading an excerpt, a review of a book by David Chadwick, who is an American who went to Japan to join a Zen monastery and spent a good deal of time there. And he has a book where he's collected a lot of the sayings of Roshi, I think it's Suzuki, the Zen master who founded the San Francisco Zen Center.
Suzuki.
And he tells a story of a student who comes to Suzuki and says that during a practice of sitting meditation, she had a lot of very distressing and upsetting thoughts in her mind.
Right.
And what he said to her was something like, there are a lot of birds that fly in the sky, but the sky doesn't care whatever type of bird flies through it.
Right, exactly.
Which I thought was such a great way of indicating that the sky is not concerned with the content of thoughts, but just a place where birds fly. Whereas we can be very concerned with the contents of the thought and not see the openness of the sky that can contain all of the thoughts.
Right. We got so caught up by all the black birds flying in our own sky, and sometimes become one of the birds. Yeah. So I guess MBCT remind us to be aware that we're not the birds, we're the sky, almost. We're the sky.
And the practice of mindfulness helps you to feel that openness and spaciousness.
So I mean, I have been studying mindfulness since 2 decades ago, so I could see how. I mean, I watch how mindfulness becomes so popular lately, and you're one of the main pioneers in this field. And I see that MBCT has changed many people's life. Even in Taiwan, I mean, they have like Chinese-run MBCT, so it's a very your MBCT is really widespread now. So MBCT has changed many people's life. How about you? What do you think? Does it change your life in some way?
Well, yes, it has. Not in a crazy dramatic way, but for example, because of MBCT, I had to start a mindfulness practice myself. I realized very quickly that my skills as a cognitive therapist, which was my orientation when I started working in this area, were not going to be enough to allow me to teach mindfulness listen to people's experiences with mindfulness and to understand the movement of the mind in any kind of way that would be helpful. To step outside of concepts and help people connect to their bodies and to present moment experience. So you could say that that is one of the ways in which MBCT made a change for me that I haven't, gone back to. I still have a daily practice, almost daily, but it has changed me that way. I think it's made me a little bit more of an activist or advocate for the use of these kinds of contemplative practices in mental health and psychiatry. I think that's been a cause of mine. I don't know that I would have had that otherwise. I may just have been a good cognitive therapist, but this is an additional dimension.
Yeah.
And now I find that I'm very passionate about increasing access to online resources that use mindfulness to help people with emotion regulation. Because I still think it's a big problem. Like in New York City, which, I have this old joke, it's probably become a little bit stale by now. In New York City, everyone is in therapy. But good luck trying to find an MBCT therapist. There are maybe 2 or 3, 4 people that I know that I can refer to.
Okay.
So if you have trouble finding an MBCT therapist in New York City, how much more trouble are you going to have if you're living in Kansas City?
Jesus.
Yeah, and so online access, online platforms, I think are like one possible solution.
Yeah. I guess this is one good thing about the pandemic is really expand people's access to MBCT. I think New York City have too many analysts, I mean, you're competing with...
I don't want to go there.
And the analysts...
Remember, we're trying to practice non-judgment.
It's all good. But I think what I see about how MBCT changed you is it really kind of expand your life in terms of being more compassionate, right? I mean, you're really advocating to bring something that's useful to more people.
Yeah.
If you never learned about mindfulness, you probably wouldn't go this route as much. So I assume, so the one interesting aspect of being mindful is really helping us to connect with more people. And that goes to actually the roots of mindfulness. The original roots of mindfulness is not just to be clear, but is really to open up to the construction of reality, to understand people's suffering, and at the same time lend out our helping hands. So I see what you're doing.
That, yeah.
I see what you're doing right now is very, although we didn't use the B word, Buddhism, what you're doing is very in the path of Dharma, right? In the path of Buddhism, in terms of compassion in action. So I see what you're doing right now is very, very meaningful to pass on mindfulness to many others.
It's a real privilege to be doing this work, and the way it came together, working with great colleagues and seeing some of this take hold, and also all of the strong empirical evidence. Because without the randomized control trials and the evidence from studies across the world, this never would have had a foothold in psychiatry and mental health the way it does now.
Yeah. Right, it is important to remind our audience that MBCT is not just another therapy, but it's very evidence-based. And that's a key word here, really. I mean, it is backed up by a lot of studies, scientific research, especially randomized clinical trials. So it is a very well-established practice at this point. So it is important for our audience to know about this. Now, if I know you've written many books, which book would you recommend for our audience to read?
If you just want to read a good story about mindfulness and emotions, then I would say The Mindful Way Through Depression.
Okay.
If you want to take yourself through a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy type of program, then I would say The Mindful Way Workbook.
Okay. So those are 2 good books to read for our audience if they want to learn more about MBCT?
Yeah.
Excellent. So, any final words for our audience today?
I just appreciate the interest and curiosity to learn about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And I hope that, if there's any way of trying to take part in some of this in a very small way or in a very big way, that people take advantage of it, because there's a lot that they can benefit from.
Great, great. And I think I would name this episode as Thought is Not Fact.
Thoughts are not facts, right?
Yeah.
That's a big takeaway.
Thank you, Dr. Segal. We're very grateful to have you. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy our conversation on the NBCT. Remember, thoughts are not fact. Please pay attention to our next few episodes. We have great scholars and practitioners who will come and talk about how mindfulness and compassion can be integrated with each other. Stay tuned.